Hey, my name is Taylor. I do music and audio for a living, and this is my friend Will. He's a film and television composer, also based here in Minneapolis, and does all sorts of really cool music. We just worked together on a couple projects. Your music's been on all the major networks, Netflix, Hulu, SNL, NBC, Peacock, CBS, and BET, and
fun has been had.
Today, we're gonna talk about his music, his creative process, and some of the ways he has found to make money with his music. You know, I didn't look at pictures and I didn't realize I was just gonna blend into the background. So how did music become your career and how did you start making money?
Definitely not an epiphany. It's definitely something that's a process. I always hear artists and creatives talking about, I made it when. I find that to be patently false. I think what that suggests is that there's this moment when we emerge from the creative womb fully formed, fully financially solvent, and it doesn't work that way. Music became a full-time thing for me over the course of, I'd say, about 5 to 6 years, one little bit at a time. I got my first film commission my second year of college. I was just excited to be making money doing this thing called writing music for films.
Absolutely.
Right? That was the
dream.
So it started out small. One client turned into two, that turned into interning with a publisher who became a client. And so it really kind of became this thing that was a snowball. I think it's a willingness to diversify within your craft that allows you to move forward and make it a full-time thing.
You've made music your full-time income. It comes through a bunch of different avenues. So what is that breakdown? Like, where is the money coming from?
We have to embrace a certain amount of malleability when it comes to income, which is funny because I was the most risk-adverse human being in my early 20s. So I should not be doing what I'm doing now for all intents and purposes.
I feel the same way.
In terms of streams of income, it's not only continued to change, but there have been some mainstays. You know, there have been some things that have continued to garner revenue. And it's a lot of passive income in the form of music licensing and royalties. That makes up about half of my income. I think that there's a misnomer when we talk about passive income. It's not set it and forget it. You continually have to feed the beast and put in the time if you want that passive income to be sustainable. And then the other half of the pie is a real grab bag, everything from custom scores for long-form narrative projects like the film that we just worked on together, and hopefully the film that you and I have coming up on. That one's gonna be exciting. We live in Minneapolis, so this is a commercial town. We're doing custom stuff for that. So it's kind of that middle dividing line. Half of it is bespoke, half of it is production and licensing.
If you hit a creative roadblock, what do you do to like find inspiration again?
Do something out of the norm. Because generally we hit a creative block because we're trying to do something the same way we've been doing it again and again and again and again, which is actually the academic definition of insanity. I usually get a creative block, thankfully never on a job, because I think that that's what separates professionals from hobbyists, is being able to turn that creative faucet on and know that something's gonna come out every single time. But I usually hit it about once a year when I'm not on a project. What I do is I do something completely different. Do something in a style I haven't composed in for years, or change the way I'm approaching my production workflow. And the way that I bailed myself out last year is I said, I'm gonna write a piece of Baroque music. I'm just gonna do it for a chamber ensemble, you know, something that's very classically schmaltzy, and it worked because another album fell out of my head right after it. Finding a way to break up that creative linear path that we've beaten ourselves to death on, I think that that's kind of the saving grace.
You work solely as a composer, and did you go to college for that?
I studied composition. I attended St. John's here in Minnesota. That was a really good education for me because I had some self-taught production knowledge. We were studying, doing a lot of theory and things like that. For me, it was sort of a parallel course of continuing to be self-taught in the production side of things, but really eating my academic vegetables, for lack of a better way of describing that, in studying more Western classical music.
Do you think it helped?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I think where post-secondary education falls short, and this is no problem of universities because it's impossible to prepare students for everything. Either there are schools that are great at teaching the really technical skills, and then there are other schools that are better at teaching theory and artistic approach and artistic intent and things like that, but you really need both. Because generally, what's relevant when you start your first year of college is no longer relevant by your last year of college. If we're talking about undergraduate degrees, right?
If you're actually learning and growing through the experience.
Exactly. Well, that's the hope. The thing that was really helpful for me is that I'm not sure that I would have the self-discipline to study a lot of the things that are less intuitive about music. As soon as you have to look at music from a more analytical standpoint, people start dropping off because it's not fun.
No.
You know what I mean? Like it's hard.
Right.
And so that was the good part of my education. It forced me to approach music in a way that was both intuitive with what I was doing on my own, but also analytical.
I love that you actually were able to use like the composition side, because that's why I just hired you for a job. Because for me, I am not good at like doing orchestral arranging or anything like that. I can fake it,
Sure.
but not on a really good timeline. And I was able to like call you up, and over the course of a few days, you just gave us some bangers that the client loved.
Fun was had.
So we just did this project together called A Heart Like Water. I was like working on the audio, you were doing the music.
Yeah.
And there was a part where I had to get you some stuff, and then you kicked
Yep.
it back to me, so it worked with the score.
Yep.
What other things on that project did you learn that you have carried forward to all the other projects that you're doing now?
Having a creative process that starts over every time is really important, because the temptation for all of us as composers is that we're going to continue to lean back on the process that we've always had. And I think finding a way to either create a new sonic palette or give yourself different sonic colors to work with every single time is important. So I would say making custom samples is a game changer. So for A Heart Like Water, what I ended up doing is I booked a session with a vocalist. We just created, this custom library of sounds that I could then use on the film. And again, when you give yourself a different sound to play with, the way you approach scoring it and the way you approach writing the music is going to be different. So it keeps the project fresh. We had maybe 24 samples total, which is a really light footprint in the grand scheme of sample libraries that have thousands and thousands of samples. We didn't even pitch things perfectly, if I remember correctly, because you want it to feel a little raw, and it makes it feel a little more organic. And that sense of imperfection when you're approaching sampling is everything. That's what makes it feel real. A guitarist is not going to hit a string the same way every single time. A snare is not going to get hit in the same place. It's those imperfections that make things feel human.
What are some of those non-intuitive parallel skills that helped you launch your career?
A liberal arts education is maybe the best thing a composer or an artist in general can do, because you can be very, very talented at whatever your craft is. If you don't know how to display and talk about your craft, that becomes problematic. So there's a reason that we have 2 smaller displays and a 3rd big one. And this is a helpful tip that was provided to me courtesy of Jeff Rono, who was one of my old mentors and an amazing composer. The video monitor playback, the monitor that you use to play the film, especially when your director's in the room, have that be the largest. There's a bit of psychology that goes into play. I mean, you know as the composer that the film is important, but having a large monitor for video playback when the director and the producer are there is a way to non-verbally relay to them, I value your film, it's the most important thing in the room. So a bit of a psychology thing. Thank you, Jeff. Being a really good written and spoken communicator is huge. Interfacing with clients at the very beginning, reaching out for internships, polishing resumes, writing bios, setting up your website, client-facing communication, and having a really strong sensibility for those things is huge. So this is a piece of Behringer kit. It's just basically a simple control surface. All the dust that you see on it, you see how often it gets used. I turn that on so the faders move, because the faders are motorized when producers are here, because it looks fancy.
Knobs and buttons sell.
That's true. I mean, I feel like you can up your rate 10% for every 20 knobs you have in your studio. Does that make me a knob? A big one. Having a really strong sense of written and oral communication and finding a way to platform that, like YouTube, person to person, stuff like that. I think that that's been a really vital ancillary skill for me to have.
And you've even merged the two and have a YouTube course, an internet course?
Yes. I shot an online course called Orchestral Anatomy, and I completed it, completed all the supplemental course materials and things like that, and then it sat on a hard drive for 2 years.
Like all great projects.
Like all great projects. They just need to age like wine, you
Yep,
know?
exactly.
No, don't age your content. It doesn't age well. Put it out there.
Yeah.
I released that and I wanted to get it out for free. I think it's kind of bridging the gap of things I wish I'd known 10 years ago. It sort of is a shortened version of what my professional path looked like in terms of lessons on composition, but also how to apply some of the tech in terms of software. Hopefully doing it in a way that's simple and approachable and digestible.
I've watched the first couple videos. Oh, I was learning stuff.
Oh, party on,
And so,
dude, thank you.
yeah, definitely great. Definitely check them out. But you shot that in your old space.
I
So
did.
that's gorgeous and cool. But this space is amazing.
This is my wife's fault in the best possible way. This space is all of Cindy Yang's doing. She's a fabulous stylist and designer. You can check her out on TikTok. I expressed to Synth that, we really need to get an inspiring writing room. We're only, in some respects, as creative as the mindset that we're in when we start working, I think sometimes.
Yeah.
And you can do that regardless of whether you have a beautiful space or not, but it certainly doesn't hurt.
I think that's like one of the things that's often overlooked. When I was just starting out and I was just trying to get the gear I needed to make the difference, it took me so long to figure out, wait, I need to kind of feel the inspiration to get the gears going.
Right.
And then as you progress, there's ways you can optimize that, but also kind of get over that. So
Yes.
like when I have to work on my laptop in a closet because that's all that's available, I can do it. Or in an airplane seat or in the back of the car, especially if you have a home studio and you're doing this for a living. Sometimes carving out that space and prioritizing it is so important.
It's hugely important. And I think as I've continued to grow in my career and change and grow, I've even prioritized the way I feel in a space over the gear. One of the ways that I've tried to be really intentional is to keep things really sparse. I like simple technical overhead that works every single time because then I spend more time being creative and less time trying to figure out why Vienna Ensemble Pro isn't connecting to my template.
For an interface, you have the Scarlett.
When I said I like simple tech, I was not kidding. This has 6 inputs, 6 outputs, the end. It has 2 XLRs. If I need more than 2 XLRs in my studio at any given point, there's a problem because it means I should be running the session in a proper live room. What you'll notice looking around is that this is not what we would call a critical listening environment. For me, personally, it's a preference thing. If you're in a space that's perfectly treated, your mixes, at least for me as a composer, they're not gonna translate well. There's very little treatment outside carpet being on the floor.
So I always check mixes on my phone speaker
Oh, wow.
because I know that most people's first impression of anything I do is probably going to be on the toilet, either muted or with the speaker. How great does 3 displays make your life?
I'm never going back. You can't make me. I think the most important piece of kit that I have is a fully weighted keyboard. Whatever facilitates your process as an instrumentalist first and foremost, I think is important. So the stylophone, you saw it on that Beatles documentary. You've got this metallic surface, and when you connect the pen to the metallic surface, it completes the circuit and you get a little analog synth out of it. So you go. So that's a stylophone. This is fun. The plan is to sample this. In another life, I used to make contact instruments. It's got tone controls that allow it to be a bass or more of like a lead line. So again, it's mostly just stuff that I get to look at that's kind of purdy. So those are my pop's old cameras. A timer that times down to 2.5 minutes, making it useless for absolutely everything. My grab bag of fun for random percussion and distortion stomp boxes. A wall of random pictures. We don't know who that is. The Fox is sort of an old painting print. It starts out rather regal looking with all of these gentlemen in their riding jackets and the group of dogs. But the thing about fox hunts, again, is that they don't end well for the fox.
No.
So this was originally a triptych, but the paintings got progressively scarier. So we just put up the first one. This is the wall that we go to when we actually want live instruments, because spending all of your time in the box or working with samples is generally a great way to kill all your inspiration. So I got this electric cello when I was working on a horror film out of Dallas called Alp. I can't play cello. As you can see, if you look really close, these were originally tape markings for when I was desperately trying to fret the instrument so I could actually play more than one note at a time to actually put together a melody. But these days, what I really more or less use it for is just to create scary sounds. Most of these I've had since I was a teenager. This was the guitar I played for the first time when I first played First Ave here in Minneapolis. The family friend I bought it from shaved down part of the body because it was more comfortable on your arm. Because when you're a shredder, you need to be comfortable. This guitar's name is Betty, after Betty White. God rest your soul, Betty. This is a bass. As we all know, if you're a guitarist, you can fake bass. I, like many composers, were really good at pretending we play a lot of instruments. The piano's my primary, but my mother was folk and fingerstyle classical guitar player growing up. And so we always had a guitar in every corner of the house. So even though keys is my primary instrument, it was just sort of inevitable that I would pick up the guitar. Another thing that a lot of folks neglect to do when they're starting out is that they only use the plugins that come with their DAW. It's a great way to, especially if you're on a budget, to understand these are the rudimentary ways that a compressor works. This is how you EQ something. But what people neglect to do sometimes is start using third-party plugins. And you guys, some of this stuff is free. It's been really useful. And again, that's free. But this goes on my master mix bus for everything. I was with a composer when I was in Los Angeles. I think you could tell I was panicking a little bit. It's like, because as the lowly intern, it was my job to make sure the computer was up and running again, which presently it was not at that moment. His words of sage wisdom for me, Will, don't worry, just don't f it up. So I ended up getting him a shirt that said DFIU, meaning don't f it up university. And the Latin on the back said something like per errorum, something like that, which translated to through error, we move steadfastly towards competency.
Oh, so good.
It was fun. When in doubt, restart it out. That's the Storl of the Mori, as it were. What we find, I think, is that it's our skill sets and our abilities that are the determining factor in the work that we're putting out. It's not our kit. It's not the software. It's not that
Gear
stuff.
does not matter.
No.
It just helps us be faster, have superpowers.
You're right. You're right. That's what turns us into a Marvel character.
This was so fun, dude. I can't wait to work together again in the future.
Likewise, man.
All your links will be linked below. The film, A Heart Like Water, your music on Dr. Death, your music on everywhere.
Thanks, man.
And to all my filmmaker friends, Will Van De Crommert.
Dude, good job. I can't even pronounce it most days.
All right, let's make it official.
Cool, man. Thanks, folks.